This story began with a young man standing on the edge of a bridge, ready to end it all. At that moment, various terrible memories of failures flashed through his head. One of which was about his school life where, due to his clumsiness, he had mistakenly poured water on a girl who was his classmate. Naturally, the girl responded by yelling at him, calling him an idiot, and asking what the heck was wrong with him. A group of students watching as the scene unfolded looked on with irritation, calling him an unlucky bastard. Our protagonist, Zhu Chen, stood there motionless with the bucket he had used to douse the girl resting at his feet. When he tried to justify himself by saying it was an accident caused by the slippery floor. The gathered students called him a disgusting liar who caused trouble and always claimed it to be an accident. The wet girl, wiping her head, also said irritably that this was not the first time, and he was just a half-loser who brought disaster everywhere he went. At those words, the crowd supported her while Zhu Chen could only watch in fear at the horrifying scene. The next memory was about his mother, who called him a brain-dead wimp because he could not fill out his college application form correctly, and because of that, he was not accepted into college. The mother angrily shouted, asking him why he was just so unlucky. Ever since he was a child, he had always been unlucky. Zhu Chen, with tears in his eyes, tried explaining that there was a problem with the system. But the mother ripped the college form into pieces and said it had always been from one excuse to another. Ever since she gave birth to him, he had always been an unlucky twat. She began to leave the room and declared that from that moment on, she had disowned him because it was clear he was just a capital failure with no future ambition. Zhu Chen, with a sad expression, remembered that since birth, he had been cursed with bad luck, almost like everything was working against him. Because of his unfortunate life, every relative he ever knew, including his mother, hated him and gradually disappeared from his life. 10 years passed, and his unlucky life never changed. Now, clocking 30, he had assumed his predicament was supposed to change because of the saying that, at 30 years old, life would eventually get better. But that never happened. Well, fortunately for him, he managed to find a girl that loved him. It was the 100th day anniversary of their relationship. So, our boy decided to surprise her at work with a red flower bouquet and a card to propose. On getting to her workplace, our guy noticed the chick coming his way, so he happily hid behind a wall for the surprise. However, his happiness quickly shattered when he saw his chick with another guy in a gray suit playing Romeo and Juliet. The two then hopped into a taxi, with the playboy teasing her, saying she was in for an unforgettable night of intense backshots, while she playfully called him a naughty boy. Still holding the flower bouquet in his hand, Zhu Chen stood frozen in pure shock like a complete moron as his heart pounded like it was about to explode. Suddenly, his phone rang. He picked up the call, and it was his boss at work informing him that he messed up the project, therefore his services were no longer needed. That destroyed what was left of him. In that instant, Zhu Chen dropped his phone, and the flower then took off running with the thought that he'd had enough of his terrible existence. So with that, we go to the present where Zhu Chen jumped off the bridge. Almost getting close to the water, he stretched his hand and leg, ready to accept his fate and free himself from the endless torture. He slowly closed his eyes, ready to end it all. But suddenly, he heard a cry for help, startling him. He saw a girl descending just above him and crashed into the water. So, he decided to put his side on hold and swam towards the unfortunate girl to rescue her. Getting close to the girl, he lifted her by placing his hand on her back and swam all the way to a stable ground. At the same time, he thought it was best he at least saved the girl before he took his life. Getting her to the cemented platform, the girl clung onto the slab and then coughed out the water already in her lungs. When she turned to see her savior, she realized no one was there. Meanwhile, our boy was already approaching the riverbed, ready to finally meet his maker without any interruption. At that moment, he thought about all the terrible abuses and insults he had to endure all his life. However, as soon as he closed his eyes, ready to drift to the afterlife, he noticed something strange. A very bright light appeared in front of him. The light grew increasingly intense and blinding, and amidst the brilliance, a godlike figure emerged, leaving him to wonder if it was God himself who had appeared before him. With that assumption, he begged God to come to his aid and help his miserable life, which was assumed to be cursed. But just then, a system window popped up, stating that the perfect life system had been successfully activated and bonded with the host. At that moment, he blanked out, but when he finally regained consciousness, he heard a voice saying my savior was awake. Startled, he immediately opened his eyes and shouted, asking where he was, and the rescued girl replied saying he was in the hospital. Staring at the girl with a dumbfounded look, the girl said he was incredibly lucky to have survived and then thanked him for saving her life. A female journalist and a cameraman also appeared before him, wanting to interview him and tell the world about his heroic deeds. Our guy just watched in fear, wondering why everyone was looking at him like he was some hero from the Justice League and thinking perhaps this was a turning point in his life. At that instant, a large window appeared in front of him, displaying a countdown and stating that according to the perfect life system, he had exactly 1 year to live, shocking him. In the next scene, Zhu Chen returned home, and as he stepped into his empty, disgusting apartment, he thought to himself that even though he had saved someone, nothing in his life seemed to have changed. However, as Zhu Chen turned back to glance at the door behind him, he realized that a change had indeed taken place. At that moment, a blue ghost-like figure entered his apartment. Upon seeing this strange creature, Zhu Chen thought to himself that it was the same weird figure that had been following him about while claiming to be the perfect life system. Closing the door to his apartment, Zhu Chen asked the blue ghost why he only had 1 year to live and what even the hell was a perfect life system. However, the ghost was obviously distracted, staring at the plate of unfinished food on top of the shelf. After that, Blue Eye then turned to him with a weird facial expression and reported that the food remains on the plate had been analyzed and it contained potato and diced beef. But Zuchen shouted, demanding it answered his question. With that, Blue Eye diffused its body and said it would respond to the host's queries. Suddenly, the light around the apartment started to dim, startling Zuchen. Then, a giant black man-like figure laughing like the devil appeared before his eyes, like some kind of presentation. Blue Eye informed him that in his previous life, he used to be a very wicked and murderous person called Cthulhu. So, because of his wickedness, the god of heaven was provoked and then decided to punish him. The god of heaven also declared that, because he had brought immense suffering to the world, his body was cursed to be reincarnated into the mortal world to suffer. After the frightening presentation, Blue Eye started to gather itself. After that, it pointed out that this was Zhu Chen's final reincarnated life, and it so happened that the heavenly god had seen his repentance, so he had decided to give him another chance. The second chance was the perfect life system. Blue Eye then clarified that Zhu Chen could think of him as an artificial intelligence. Placing his hand on his head in confusion, Zhu Chen assumed all of this must be a hallucination, likely caused by a lack of oxygen. But Blue Eye insisted that all it had said was nothing but the truth and then urged him to give it a try. Suddenly, someone banged on the door angrily while asking for rent and ordering for the door to be opened. Zhu Chen immediately recognized the person at the door to be his landlady and began to panic. He then turned to Blue Eye in fear and asked if it could be of any assistance to him. Hearing this, Blue Eye stated that the host requirement had been detected and then announced the opening of the store interface. At that instant, a blue window popped up displaying company shares, 6 houses, and a combat power of 80. Blue Eye then asked Zhu Chen to choose any of the following items, but Zhu Chen could not understand how any of these things could help his predicament in any way. Desperate, he ordered the ghost to hurriedly choose the most suitable option on his behalf. Blue Eye then agreed, stating that the analysis had been completed. Amidst a blinding light, another window popped up displaying the novice package containing a decent job, a Ferrari, a ripped body, and a steady cash flow. Suddenly, the landlady burst into the room with fury, but what she saw before her eyes vanished all the anger. Before her eyes was a man hotter than Robert Pattinson, with the abs of Zac Efron and the curves of a hot model. Seeing this, the cougar knelt before him with eyes of love and asked if he had been working out. She moved closer and said since he didn't have a girlfriend, she would love to hop on his rod. Caught off guard, Zhu Chen immediately said he wasn't interested in her religion and then promised to transfer her rent after taking a shower. But the thirsty landlady said he shouldn't worry about the rent and then stormed out his apartment. Just as she left, Zhu Chen heard the sound of a notification in his pocket. Stunned, he realized it was his phone he had initially thought he had thrown away. While staring at the phone's screen, the system announced that the reward had been deposited. Zhu Chen's eyes nearly popped out his sockets when he saw that his account had been credited with $100,000. Blue Eye also displayed another system window, revealing that Zhu Chen was now the beneficiary of millions of shares in the Galaxy Group of companies. After that, Blue Eye opened the curtains and showed him a red Ferrari parked just outside his apartment, and seeing this, Zhu Chen nearly died from too much excitement. Not believing how much his luck had changed, he fell to his knees and tearfully thanked the god for giving him the system that had changed his life. However, Blue Eye warned him not to show appreciation just yet as the presentation wasn't even over. Blue Eye stated that although this was an opportunity for him to change his life, it was also a challenge. He then informed Zhu Chen that he must complete every task assigned by the system to accumulate merit points. When his merits value accumulate to the point of 100%, his life timer of 1 year would be eliminated. However, failure to accumulate these merit points within the 1-year period would result in his death. With that, Blue Eye said the presentation was over, and then showed him a window displaying the countdown of his time remaining, which was 364 days. Also displayed on the window was a warm reminder that as the host redeemed his reward, the merit value would return to 0, and his unlucky trait would activate. Seeing this, Zhu Chen became tensed and immediately asked Blue Eye if what he meant was that by his merit dropping to 0 he would be unlucky again. Blue Eye replied, saying actually he would be more unlucky than he used to be, giving Zhu Chen a total shock. To calm down, Zhu Chen quickly moved to the water dispenser to pour himself a glass of water. However, due to his unlucky trait that had been activated, he accidentally pressed the hot water switch, burning his hand in the process and dropping the glass of water. The water fell onto an extension cord on the floor, which caused a massive electrical surge that fried the circuit box controlling the building. As a result, 2 men stood in front of the circuit box, both surprised and wondering who the unfortunate bastard might be that was responsible for the blackout. Just then, Zhu Chen walked out of his apartment. On seeing him, Saitama turned his angry gaze at him and ordered him to stop. But our boy just ran towards the building exit, claiming to be a passerby. Zhu Chen ran into his new Ferrari, hoping to hide for a while, but the blue ghost was already seated in the car. Even with the terrible situation he was in, it didn't stop Zhu Chen from admiring the luxury of the Ferrari. He admired how ergonomic and sporty the steering wheel was and also called Blue Eye's attention to the beauty of the car interior. However, Blue Eye reminded him to keep an eye on the time he had left to live. Suddenly, Zhu Chen's phone rang, and on the other end of the call was someone who said his name was Fatty and then informed Zhu Chen that there would be a classmates reunion that night. Fatty argued that Zhu Chen had to be there now that he had a beautiful girlfriend, and while those bozos who had bullied him back in school were still single, it was time to take revenge on them. Zhu Chen tried declining the invitation, claiming that he wasn't feeling fine, but Fatty insisted he must attend because his presence would be a slap on his bullies' faces. Ending the call, Zhu Chen became nervous from the fear of reliving his terrible past. Sensing his nervousness, Blue Eye announced that it could detect cowardice attributes. So because of that, he informed Zhu Chen that his first task would be to attend the class reunion and do something that would make his classmates' jaw drop. Zhu Chen responded angrily, saying he couldn't go in this unlucky state and, even worse, his girlfriend had dumped him. Moreover, he remembered that Horan, the guy hosting the reunion with his friends, used to bully him back in school. Hearing this, the human AI felt emotional, so he reminded Zhu Chen that with his newbie pack, it would only take him seconds to make those punks' jaws drop to the floor and also put them in their place. Zhu Chen thought deeply about those words and muttered under his breath, saying he was not the same Zhu Chen that he used to be. Stepping on the gas pedal, he told Blue Eye that his advice made sense, and he was pumped up to go. Some time passed, and Zhu Chen was finally able to reach the destination of the reunion. Just then, a fine chick working for the hotel noticed that he parked his Hot Wheels in front of the entrance. So, she approached him and informed him that blocking the entrance was prohibited. But our guy simply rolled down the window of his car like a GTA 6 character, told the girl he was in a hurry, and asked if she could park the car for him. But at that moment, the chick was speechless due to the attractive appearance of both the car and its owner and couldn't respond. So Zhu Chen stepped out of the car, introduced himself, took hold of her hand, and then handed her the key to his fast wheel, stating that he would leave the car in her care. While the girl stood there, wondering who the hot guy was, Zhu Chen started to walk away, feeling completely uncomfortable, as this was the first time he'd ever tried to rizz up a fine girl. However, Blue Eye showed him a picture of himself rizzing up the girl and advised him to stick to that pattern throughout the evening, assuring him that he'd be fine. With this encouragement, Zhu Chen was pumped up like he just had caffeine. So he opened the door to the hall and stepped in, saying here we go. Inside, he could see his old classmates chilling and vibing. He then walked to the center of the hall, wondering how he was supposed to carry out this task. Was he supposed to walk up and announce that he was loaded now, with a car and a shitload of money, or what? Suddenly, he noticed a familiar important figure approaching. His face immediately turned red when he saw a red-haired beauty with 2 massive dumplings dressed in a black Versace dress. This girl's name was Lai Hanyi, and he used to have a massive crush on her back in school. At that moment, he considered approaching her to say hello, but of course, his bad luck kicked in. He crashed into a waiter carrying a tray of red wine, spilling some on his shirt. This accident attracted all his classmates, causing them to look in his direction, while Zhu Chen embarrassingly stared down at the stain on his shirt. He was reliving his bad old times. Concerned, the waiter anxiously tried to wipe the red wine stain off his shirt, but Zhu Chen couldn't help but notice everyone staring at him and mocking him, calling him the same ugly, unlucky face he had always been. Unable to withstand the recurrence of his terrible past, Zhu Chen bolted out of the hall while the waiter tried to apologize for the accident. He ran into the toilet and locked himself inside while sadly thinking about why his misfortune had returned at such a crucial moment. Suddenly, Blue Eye appeared inside the toilet stall, asking what he was doing, which frightened Zhu Chen. Zhu Chen angrily responded, asking the Smurf to stop scaring out of him. With a serious expression, Blue Eye inquired how the task was going, but Zhu Chen responded by bowing his head sadly. After pausing for a moment, Zhu Chen replied that the task wasn't going well. He explained that with the unlucky trait he was just losing aura points by making a fool of himself and reliving his terrible high school experience. Blue Eye then cut in and asked him not to do the task if he found it difficult. A bit confused, Zhu Chen asked if he wouldn't die if he didn't complete the task. However, Blue Eye went mute, staring at him, wondering if the guy shared a brain with a damn rooster. After a few silent moments, Blue Eye placed his hand over his shoulder and then demanded to know what was difficult about the task. Blue Eye explained that since he had a luxury car and $100,000 cash, there was no one in the hall that could compete with him. After this, he advised Zhu Chen to make use of his pea-sized brain to accomplish the task. The Blue Ghost added that besides, the people considered him to be the biggest loser in the world, so he needed to prove to them that he was now a Sigma. With these encouragements, Zhu Chen was more confident than ever in completing the task and lifting the curse. So, he stormed back inside the hall, and just as he walked a bit, he heard someone calling out to him, asking if he was really Zhu Chen. It turned out to be Lai Hanyi, who said she had never expected to see him at a party organized by Haoran. Lai Hanyi then mentioned that the alumni party was merely a way for Haoran to show off after he became the president of his father's company. In response, Zhu Chen asked why she was acting so friendly since, back in school, it was not as if they were close pals. Obviously irritated by what he said, Lai Hanyi reminded him of an incident that had occurred back in school. Zhu Chen asked what incident, and Lai Hanyi accused him of acting like he had amnesia. She then angrily explained that he had once burst into the female dressing room while she was changing and took a mental shot of her exposed plots. Zhu Chen instantly remembered the incident, so he nervously shouted, clarifying that he didn't mean to peep at her waxed coochie. It had happened by accident that the teacher had asked him to move things to the locker room, and he had never expected anyone to be inside. Lai Hanyi asked why he was arguing with her and then added that after peeping at her sacred regions, he buzzed off like a spineless scum without even attempting to play with them. Zhu Chen replied, saying he ran away because she was beating the crap out of him, so he needed to save his ribs from getting broken. Suddenly, from the crowd, someone interrupted their conversation by asking what all the bickering was about. Lai Hanyi turned immediately and realized it was Haoran, and in turn, the arrogant face didn't waste any time complimenting her beauty and called her the school flower. He then offered to give her a managerial position in his father's company, which he recently took over. But she rejected his offer, saying she had just signed a contract with a media house called Galaxy Entertainment to become their advertising model. The crowd then started to murmur just about how successful the Galaxy group of companies was and how worthy Lai Hanyi was to be part of such a company. However, it was at that moment that Horan noticed Zhu Chen's presence and, in surprise, asked if he also attended parties. Zhu Chen just stood there frozen in shock as Horan rained insults at him, reminding him of how back then, in school, he was an unfortunate nobody. Haoran also said he was certain that till now he would still be a broke mommy boy with no car or money. However, he then said even though Zhu Chen was worthless, they were still classmates, so he had no choice but to help him. With that, Haoran mentioned that he was in need of a driver, and while extending his hand, he said he wouldn't mind making Zhu Chen his chauffeur. Annoyed, Zhu Chen yanked his hand away like a bad protagonist and declared that he didn't need any job from him. With the skin of his palm wounded, Haoran fumed with anger and was about to call Zhu Chen a useless piece of shit before Zhu Chen thanked him and said, just like Lai Hanyi, He also had joined the Galaxy group of companies. Across the hall, a voice shouted what? It turned out to be Haoran, who, in shock, demanded to know the exact Galaxy group of companies Zhu Chen was working with. While Lai Hanyi listened curiously, Zhu Chen replied that it was the one and only Galaxy group of companies everyone knew. On the other hand, Lai Hanyi, lost in thought, wondered if Zhu Chen was telling the truth or just bragging. At the same time, Haoran asked Zhu Chen to prove that he actually worked there, but Zhu Chen calmly replied, saying they all came for a reunion and not to evaluate people's achievements. Nervous, Haoran tried defending himself by saying he didn't mean it that way. However, at that moment, the tension between Zhu Chen, Haoran, and Lai Hanyi was quite obvious, and the other students could sense something was definitely wrong. Suddenly, a random loser walked in, saying he couldn't enter the premises with his motorcycle because someone's Ferrari was blocking the entrance. Hearing Ferrari, Haoran was shocked and in disbelief. To prove he was right, the loser opened the curtains to show them the red Ferrari parked just outside the premises. Admiring the stunning wheels, the classmates gathered around, excitedly discussing how cool the car was, its sleek carbon fiber interior, and the fact that it cost around $4 million. Haoran also joined in the conversation, pointing out how the Ferrari wasn't just an ordinary supercar. He lectured like a car freak about how the car was made for luxury and then mentioned that the car should cost more than $6 million. Spreading his hands in excitement, he remarked that the owner of the car must be super rich because the car was even more expensive than his Maserati. He also said he would love to know the owner of the car so they could connect on LinkedIn. At that moment, Lai Hanyi turned and noticed our boy quietly seated like the perfect Riz Lord sipping Cabernet Sauvignon. Soon, Haoran shifted his gaze to Zhu Chen and said since he claimed to work with Galaxy Group, he should know a lot about luxury cars. So with that, everyone would love to see the kind of wheels he drove to the reunion. But just as he said those words, the hot staff from earlier walked in, calling out for Mr. Zuchen. When she sighted him, she moved towards him and said she had been looking for him. She bowed and returned the key to his Ferrari, saying since she hadn't driven such a luxurious car in her broke life, she wouldn't be able to park it for him. Zhu Chen then collected the key and said no problem, giving everyone a total shock, literally. Zhu Chen also said he had already greeted everyone, so there wouldn't be any reason to repark the car, and then asked her to return to work. As the girl left, the broke dude who came with the motorcycle immediately hugged Zhu Chen and teased him for hiding the fact that he was wealthy. Zhu Chen simply replied that cars were only material possessions, and he didn't see any need to show off like some shallow sisses would. Zhu Chen also added that no matter how rich he was still equal to everyone else in the room because they were all old classmates, and he would never use material things like money to classify people. Impressed by his speech, the students cheered him on, drumming in support of what he said. At that moment, the perfect life system window popped up announcing that his task had been completed and he had been rewarded with a 5% merit value. Meanwhile, the crowd of students rushed to have a drink with the star boy of the occasion while Haoran stood by the side, fuming with anger as he almost turned into a vampire from jealousy. Later that night, a chick with jiggles that would choke the life out of you lounged on top of Zhu Chen's Ferrari live streaming to her IG subscribers. She told her online fans that while exploring the streets that night, she didn't expect to see such a luxurious car. She relaxed on the trunk of the Ferrari like she owned it and said since the car matched her outfit, she wouldn't mind taking pictures while sitting on it. Just then, one of her followers warned her in the comments that there was a guy behind her. Zhu Chen suddenly appeared out of nowhere, asking the pretty chick if she'd enjoyed taking pictures. Startled, the girl lost her balance and landed her soft cheeks on the hard ground. Zhu Chen then picked up her phone and jokingly announced that it was still live and then asked if she was an anchor. With her head bowed, the girl apologized for sitting on his car trunk and then begged that he return her phone. Pointing to a dent in his car, Zhu Chen said there was no problem and he could return the phone. But who would fix the dent on his car? Zhu Chen then moved toward her and said he had given her two options. First was to pay for the damage to his car, to which the girl explained that she was just a useless brokey and couldn't afford to pay. With a mischievous smile, Zhu Chen said that she was left with the second option. While the phone was still recording, Zhu Chen gently held her chin and ordered her to get in the car with him, sparking a flood of comments from her subscribers. The girl, confused, didn't understand what the hell was going on as Zhu Chen opened his car door. Still holding her phone and recording, Zhu Chen slightly nudged her inside his car. Watching the live stream, Zhu Chen remarked with excitement that her broadcast was gaining popularity really fast. He then placed the phone by the door handle and informed the girl that her cultured audience seemed to enjoy the freaky things going on. Scared for her life, the girl tried to get out of the car, saying she would rather give him the money for the repairs, but Zhu Chen grabbed her hand and ordered her to stop. With a serious expression, he told her that the car paint was worth tens of thousands of dollars, and he wasn't sure a Gen Z baddie like her could afford such. The girl also embarrassingly admitted that she won't be able to afford it. Zhu Chen agreed and then asked her to start driving. For clarification purposes, Zhu Chen explained that he couldn't drive because he was drunk, so all he needed from her was to help take him home. Surprised, the girl asked if all he wanted from her was to drive him home. Zhu Chen responded with a yes and then ordered her to hurry up. A few minutes into the drive, Zhu Chen asked if she had any experience in driving, and she nervously replied, saying she wouldn't dare audition for Fast and Furious. In reaction to this, Zhu Chen immediately shouted "Hey" out of the blue, causing the girl to almost die from shock. In a matter of seconds, he casually draped his arm over her, giving the impression he was about to pipe her, causing the girl to blush furiously as she stammered, asking what he was doing. Zhu Chen leaned forward, crossed the seatbelt over her, and then calmly told her to keep her panties on, saying he just wanted to fix her seatbelt. However, this move caused a lot of outrage from the audience watching the live stream, as some of them even requested the need to call the police. Suddenly, there was a knock on the car window. It turned out to be a cop who simply asked Zhu Chen to move his car elsewhere, but our boy almost pissed himself just at the sight of the officer. The following morning, his Ferrari somehow ended up at the police station. Finally sober, Zhu Chen couldn't believe the girl actually parked his car in front of the police station and vanished. But at that moment, he found a letter in his compartment. The letter was written by the girl who introduced herself as Lisa and explained that she had driven the Ferrari to the police station because she didn't know where he lived, and then she dropped her number in case he wanted compensation. Suddenly, Blue Eye appeared, asking Zhu Chen how he felt. Zhu Chen responded by saying that doing the task and earning rewards wasn't as difficult as he had thought. Zhu Chen also expressed his shock that he hadn't been arrested, considering he was right in front of a police station. In response, Blue Eye told him it was because his merits had suppressed his bad luck. With a smile on his face, Zhu Chen muttered to himself that he wasn't unlucky anymore, and the party also ended well without embarrassing himself. But Blue Eye interrupted and suggested they get the hell out of the police station immediately. But Zhu Chen pointed out that he didn't have any place to go since he had exhausted the $100 bill at the party last night. So Blue Eye suggested he used his merits to exchange. Blue Eye also informed him that there were various schemes to choose from, to which Zhu Chen asked to take a look. At the moment, the system showed a panel of nice luxury houses he could choose whose value ranged from 5 merits and above. However, Zhu Chen realized that even though the rewards were tempting, he couldn't use up his 5 merits, as doing so would mean returning to his streak of bad luck. So he opted for a suite whose merit value was just 1. In response, Blue Eye called him a bad boy with brains and then suggested they go check out the crib. Sometime later, Zhu Chen nervously halted his Ferrari when he noticed 4 mean-looking men in black. One of the mean men then approached him, showing him his picture on his phone, and then asked if he was Mr. Zhu Chen. Our guy nervously replied that he was exactly the person in the picture. However, the guy wasn't convinced because Mr. Zhu Chen in the photo looked way more handsome than the person before his eyes. Shortly after, an old butler arrived and escorted Zhu Chen and the rest of the guards to the luxurious mansion. On entering, Zhu Chen was lost for words and couldn't believe such a luxurious mansion was his. Suddenly, a lady walked in, informing him that the manor was prepared for the new major shareholder. In other words, the estate was his. Dressed in a maid outfit and with her head bowed, she welcomed Zhu Chen, introducing herself as his head maid, Carl. Hearing this, our guy's brain stopped momentarily as he found it impossible to believe that such a clappable chick was his maid. Still in disbelief, he asked the maid again if everything in the house was his. She said yes, and then explained that the Galaxy group of companies had built the residence decades ago for her major shareholder. She then clapped her hands, and suddenly Zhu Chen was surrounded by a dozen uniformed maids and servants bowing to him and reaffirming that everything in the mansion belonged to him. Carl also stepped back and stated that she was also his plot toy to destroy her body as he pleased. Instantly, Zhu Chen had a nosebleed and fainted. A few hours later, Zhu Chen was lying on the bed with Carl, caring for him. Eventually, he woke up and then inquired to know what had happened. Carl explained that he had fainted due to excessive excitement, which had caused Zhu Chen to feel embarrassed. However, he stood up from the bed and asked Carl when exactly he was supposed to resume work at the company. With a dumbfounded look, Carl asked why he wanted to work. Zhu Chen explained that as a major shareholder in the company, he would need to work. Holding a stick like a teacher, Carl then decided to school him about the company and why working there was totally useless. She also informed him that even though he was on the board of directors and the general manager of the entertainment department, the department at the moment was not functional. Curious, Zhu Chen asked how he was supposed to make a living if he didn't have to work. Carl then handed him a credit card, informing him that annual dividend money would be deposited into the card. However, Zhu Chen looked at the card and thought that the money could suddenly disappear when he eventually entered his unlucky phase. He thought it would be best to have a permanent income source. Meanwhile, near a high-rise building, Lai Henmi walked down the road while talking to her mom on the phone about work and her brother. While her mom pressured her to look for an apartment for her brother, who would start school soon, a red car was driving really fast toward her. Lai Henmi tried explaining to her mom over the phone that she had been busy with work, and as she tried crossing the road, the red car nearly sent her to the wheelchair. While her mom continued nagging on the phone, Lai Henmi angrily shouted at the crazy driver, asking if he was high on some cheap meds. Afterward, she hung up the call and noticed an old man standing by a notice board. So, she approached the old man, calling him uncle, and then asked if he wanted to rent an apartment. The old man turned to her and explained that he wasn't looking to rent an apartment, but had come to take down the advertisement he had initially put up for renting out his room. Lai Henry then asked if he had an idea of where she could rent a room, to which the old geezer informed her that every property in the district had been rented out and then advised her to look elsewhere. However, Lai Henry begged, saying she didn't care about the cost. She just wanted a room. Seeing her desperation, the old man advised her to go check the notice board, but warned that the rooms in the district were expensive. Heeding the old man's advice, she moved to the notice board, and upon seeing a young man nearby, she asked if he was also searching for a room to rent. The man turned out to be Zhu Chen with a rubber band in his mouth. When they saw each other, they were both shocked. Lai Hanmi couldn't believe her eyes, so she inquired about what he was doing there and if he lived in the area. Zhu Chen replied, saying he didn't live in the area, but had come to post an advert for rent in his apartments. However, Lai Hanmi glanced at him suspiciously, wondering if he was lying. So, she asked the whereabouts of the luxury car he had driven to the reunion earlier on. In response, Zhu Chen told her he had parked his Ferrari in the parking lot. Still, the mud-brained chick did not believe a word he said. However, Zhu Chen noticed the dissatisfied expression on her face and tried to convince her that he was telling the truth. Suddenly, his phone in his pocket rang, and it was a call from a potential tenant asking if his apartments were still available. Zhu Chen told the caller they were available, and they could come to check it out. Just as the call ended, Zhu Chen thought that with the call, Lai Hanyi would surely believe him. However, like a typical IG babe, she said she never expected him to be a real estate agent. Zhu Chen, on the other hand, tried explaining that she got everything all wrong. But the girl mentioned that he had most likely borrowed the Ferrari he drove to the reunion. Zhu Chen immediately became furious and lied that he had stolen the car from his boss, and the apartments also belonged to his boss if that would make her happy. He also said he juggled being a part-time driver at night as a side hustle. Hearing this, Lai Hanyi placed her hand on his shoulders, advising him not to live a fake life and show off possessions that didn't belong to him. Changing the subject, Zhu Chen asked if she was interested in renting his apartment, to which she replied, stating that she would love to rent, but she didn't have much money. Meanwhile, two worthless heads were riding a bicycle towards them, and the one wearing a red shirt wasn't paying attention to the road. Noticing the incoming bikers, Zhu Chen immediately sprung into action, moving Lai Henry out of the way and taking the brunt of the hit from the biker. Seeing the accident they had caused, the other biker nervously ordered his companion to flee, so they pedaled away as fast as they could to avoid getting into trouble. Just then, Blue Y appeared and said since Zhu Chen had been helpful, his merit points had increased by 0.1%. On the other hand, Zhu Chen looked down at Lai Hanmi and asked if she was okay. But to his greatest surprise, his fingers were busy massaging her buns the whole time. Before he could react, the girl punched his stupid face and told him to get his eyes checked, while the system reduced his merits by 1% from making the victim angry. Zhu Chen tried explaining that it had all been an accident. But the girl didn't want to listen to what he had to say. A few minutes later, Zhu Chen returned with water, medicine, and some popsicles. While staring at her, he felt kinda guilty for causing her injuries. However, Blue Eye remarked that women were terrible creatures, and Zhu Chen was treated unfairly for just touching her balloons. On the other hand, Lai Hanyi placed the bottle of water on the injury on her leg. But watching this, Zhu Chen informed her that he had bought the water for her to drink and that the popsicle could be used as a cold compress. But Lai Hanyi, somewhat irritated, said she would use the things as she saw fit. At that moment, Zhu Chen knelt before her, saying he would apply the medicine to her injured leg as an act of retribution for what he did. He squeezed the gel onto his palm and then carefully spread it while massaging the injured area of her leg. Surprised, Lai Hanyi stared at him and muttered to herself that he still looked very much handsome. But then, the psycho gazed at her leg and, with a mischievous grin, pondered on how he would love to lick her legs. After a brief moment of silence, Lai Hanyi suddenly noticed his cultured gaze, so she immediately used his face as a footmat and then called him a perv. She then hurriedly stood up and started to leave while Zhu Chen just lay on the floor with a bloody nose, wondering what exactly was a green flag for women. He sat up, crying that he would rather die, but Blue Eye urged him not to give up and reminded him that he needed to earn enough merit points, as his current balance was now in the negative. Suddenly, his phone rang, and as he picked up the call, it was his Uncle Han who informed him that he had a blind date for him, bringing a smile to Zhu Chen's face. A few hours later, at an airport, the crowd sighted a fancy car and wondered who the owner of such a luxurious ride could be. Glancing inside the car and seeing the hot chick behind the wheel, they commented on her good looks and fashion sense. Suddenly, the crowd's attention turned to the red Ferrari behind the girl's car. Both cars then pulled up alongside each other, and the hot girl got the opportunity to see the driver of the Ferrari and was rizzed up by his big Willy Sigma and hot face. The driver of the red Ferrari turned out to be Zhu Chen, of course. The girl then turned to the side, called Zhu Chen handsome, and asked if he planned to pick someone up. Zhu Chen replied, saying he was actually picking up his blind date, to which, in turn, the girl said she was also picking up her friend who had just arrived. She explained that the friend was from another country, but her parents had arranged for her a blind date, which she was avoiding. Suddenly, a pretty girl with a black dress and purple hair named Qiu Meng arrived waving at her. Qiu Meng hurriedly moved to enter her car, asking her to leave immediately before her blind date arrived. But that was when she noticed the red Ferrari parked at the side. Peering inside, she noticed that the driver was Zhu Chen and looked at him in surprise. Zhu Chen, in turn, waved at her and said long time no see. Zhu Chen recalled that 10 years ago, Qiu Meng had overheard her father, Zhang, telling Zhu Chen that his mother had abandoned him. After handing him some money and the key to the apartment, Zhu Chen began to leave sadly, while Zhang expressed his disapproval of the boy's mother for abandoning him. Qiu Meng, however, supported the actions of the woman like a typical feminist, saying the boy was cursed and was responsible for the death of his father. But Zhang quickly placed his hand over her filthy mouth, asking her not to talk the nonsense she heard from her mother, and then explained to her that Zhu Chen just had it tough in life. In the present, the blind date commenced with both girls seated across Zhu Chen, and the atmosphere was awkwardly silent. To end the awkward silence, Zhu Chen called for the waiter while Qiu Meng continued to stare at him, wondering how he had managed to change so much over the years. Her friend then whispered to her, asking why she hadn't told her that her blind date was rich and handsome. Qiu Meng explained that it had been a long time since she saw the guy and that she had never expected him to change so much. Finally, the waiter arrived and then asked to take their order. While staring at the menu, the girls told Zhu Chen they were fine with whatever he ordered. So, Zhu Chen ordered tuna fish, king crab, and meat, but then changed his mind and ordered for everything on the menu, shocking both the waiter and the girls. The waiter tried to inform Zhu Chen that their dishes were not cheap, while Qiu Meng wondered if Zhu Chen was just pretending to be rich to woo her. At that moment, Blue Eye popped out of the blue, informing Zhu Chen that his blind date was looking down at him and thinking he was just pretending. At the same time, Qiu Meng's friend tried to advise Zhu Chen not to order so much food because they wouldn't be able to finish it. But Zhu Chen was far gone in his delulu, telling her not to worry, saying they could take the leftovers home. Qiu Meng then said he didn't have to make such an expensive order since they were just meeting for the first time after a long time. Hearing this, Blue Eye leaned towards Zhu Chen and said the lady was acting all sweet and considerate. However, Zhu Chen told her not to worry, and as the waiter arrived, Zhu Chen promised to also pay for 20 tables in the restaurant. However, Qiu Meng was fed up with his show-off, so she angrily stood up and yelled, saying he didn't need to show off because they both knew he didn't have much money. To prove her wrong, Zhu Chen displayed his $1 million card from Galaxy Company and then handed it over to the waiter, saying he would pay for everything. At that moment, Blue Eye reported that he could detect that the host was being looked down on, so for his second task, the host must shock the girls. With a smile, Zhu Chen assured the girls that there was no need to worry because he was the executive director of Galaxy Group of Companies, and money was like toilet paper to him. Shocked, Qiu Meng asked if he was truly the executive director of the Galaxy Group, while her friend was left speechless. Noticing the girl's shocking reaction, Zhu Chen asked Blue Eye if the task had been completed, but Blue Eye just remained silent. Suddenly, the waiter returned with his card and, while still trying to force a smile, the waiter informed him that there was not even a single cent in the card. The waiter then brought out a credit card machine. With that, Zuchen insisted the waiter kept trying the card, and with every swipe, it showed that the balance was 0. Tensed, Zhu Chen started to sweat bullets as voices in the restaurant began to call him a useless thief and scammer. Hearing all this, Zhu Chen laughed and cried simultaneously like a psychopath. After this, he apologized to the waiter, claiming he had made a mistake. He explained that he used the card to pay for real estate and was not aware when the money ran out. With that, Zhu Chen dashed to the toilet, saying he would call his personal secretary and be back soon. While on the run, he zipped past a mysterious young man in a hoodie, and the mystery guy only cast a weird glance back at him. On getting inside the toilet, Zhu Chen cried, asking himself how come there was not even a penny in the card. Eventually, he pulled himself together, saying he would have to call Carl for some explanation. A few seconds later, Carl picked up the call, asking her master what the problem was. Pissed, Zhu Chen demanded she give him an explanation as to why there was no money in the Galaxy card she had given to him. Carl explained that, as she had earlier stated, the dividends were paid on an annual basis at the end of the year, and she had thought his dumb ass understood. Hearing this, Zhu Chen hung up the call and immediately grabbed Blue Eye's leg, crying worse than a toddler and begging Blue Eye to help him out of the predicament. Meanwhile, back with the girls, the waiter had already served the exquisite dish. Qiu Meng's friend, on the other hand, was wondering why Zhu Chen was not yet back. But then, she noticed Qiu Meng eating like a glutton, so she asked why she didn't seem to care about what was going on. Qiu Meng glanced with a side eye and then explained that it was Zhu Chen's problem because he was so desperate to show he was an alpha male and, as a result, put himself in a mess. Holding a fork with a piece of meat on it, she urged her friend to try it, claiming it was absolutely delicious. However, the friend said it wasn't that she didn't want to eat, she was just afraid to eat. She clarified that if Zhu Chen eventually could not pay for the expensive food, it would be whoever ate that would pay the debt. Hearing this, Qiu Meng became tense, so she paused eating with her mouth full. The friend then showed her the bill, revealing it was $500,000, and sarcastically told her to make use of her brain next time before eating like a starved hyena. Tearing up, Qiu Meng immediately grabbed her, saying she had no idea where she would find such an amount and that the last thing she wanted was to wash dishes. Consoling her, the friend looked towards the direction of the restroom and said she doubted if Zhu Chen was actually faking it and was sure he was not pretending. At the same time, inside the toilet cubicle, Zhu Chen was on his knees, begging Blue Eye to come to his aid. Blue Eye angrily responded, saying his mission was not to help in his excessive quest for enjoyment, but to help him atone for his sins here on Earth. Almost in tears, Zhu Chen demanded to know the price it would cost for him to help. Displaying a window, Blue Eye informed him that just $500,000 was all he needed to solve his current crisis. However, he warned that the price for getting the cash would cost him 3 merits points. Zhu Chen furiously responded, saying if he continued spending his merits points that way, he would soon get run over by a car and die. In response, Blue Eye turned his back and said he would take back his offer since he didn't need it, but Zhu Chen immediately asked him to hold on. The place fell silent as Zhu Chen thought deeply about this huge decision. In a moment of reflection, Zhu Chen said his Uncle Han had been kind to him and had also encouraged him while growing up. So, he only did all that to impress his daughter and show that he was not the helpless loser he used to be. Determined, he remarked that even though the cost was high, he was willing to exchange. Shortly afterward, Zhu Chen was out of the toilet and was back with the girls. He then apologized for keeping them waiting and explained that when he was trying to pay earlier on, he had mistakenly taken out the wrong card. With that, he said he was ready to pay the bill, but Kyumeng informed him that someone else had paid the bill on his behalf. Shocked, Zhu Chen demanded to know who the person was, and with an angry expression, Kyumeng replied, saying she had no idea who the person was. The person just paid and then left. Noticing her displeasure, Zhu Chen shouted, asking her not to look down on him because he was actually a big spender and the director of Galaxy Group of companies. He then mentioned that he had $500,000 to pay for the bill on his card. But Kyumeng yelled at him, saying she didn't want to hear any more of his disgusting lies. After that, she said she and her father had always wanted him to have a good life, but obviously, he was still a useless burden to society. She started to leave with her friend and then told Zhu Chen never to contact her again. Who is this mysterious guy who paid the bill on behalf of the protagonist? Comment perfect life system if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.